Let me take you into a world where loyalty, fear, family, and power are always at war with each other. This is the beginning of a saga that unfolds in New Jersey, where the shadows of organized crime stretch into every living room, every conversation, and every heartbeat that dares to dream of something better. This is the story of a man named Tony Soprano, a man who carries two families on his shoulders, one bound by blood and one bound by crime. Tony's troubles don't begin with a gunshot or a betrayal. Instead, they begin with something much quieter: panic attacks, sudden, overwhelming collapses that leave him breathless and confused. These attacks push him to do something unacceptable for someone in his line of work. He seeks therapy, and so he walks into the office of Dr. Jennifer Melfi, a calm and analytical presence who immediately senses that the man in front of her is not just stressed, he is drowning. Tony tries to downplay his life. He talks in metaphors, half-truths, and evasions. But Dr. Melfi notices the contradictions in his voice, the flashes of guilt, the bitterness. She sees a man who feels trapped, a man losing control even though he seems to control everything. And Tony reluctantly begins to explore the roots of his panic, the pressure of leading a mob crew, the unraveling of his relationships, and the suffocating expectations of his family, especially the shadow of his manipulative mother, Livia. Tony's mother is cold, sharp, and suspicious of everyone. She refuses to move into a retirement community, even though she is clearly struggling. She dismisses Tony's attempts to help, mocks his concern, and sabotages his efforts whenever she can. Tony's frustration grows, not just because of her stubbornness, but because beneath her helpless act lies a dangerous ability. She knows exactly how to manipulate the people around her, especially Tony's uncle, Junior Soprano. Uncle Junior is a man who feels aging pressing down on him like a rival. He wants recognition, authority, and fear. When he is finally offered the top position in the local mafia hierarchy, he jumps at the opportunity. But what he doesn't know, what he cannot know, is that the other bosses only support him because Tony secretly wants it that way. Junior will be the figurehead, the lightning rod, while Tony quietly runs things from the shadows. Meanwhile, Tony's own crew faces challenges of loyalty and ambition. Christopher Moltisanti, Tony's young and impulsive protege, wants to be taken seriously, respected, feared. He dreams of becoming a big player, but feels overlooked. His frustration drives him toward unpredictable decisions, some violent, some reckless, some both. Tony tries to mentor him, but their dynamic is complicated by pride, impatience, and the constant threat of betrayal that hangs over the entire organization. Inside Tony's household, things are no quieter. His wife, Carmela, carries the heavy burden of knowing exactly what her husband does while pretending she doesn't. She loves him, but she fears for him, judges him, and sometimes despises him. Her moments with Dr. Melfi's colleague, Father Phil, reveal the guilt she tries to hide. Their children, Meadow and AJ, navigate adolescence under the weight of secrets they can sense but cannot fully understand. Meadow pushes against boundaries, while AJ drifts through life with a blend of humor and confusion. Yet the heart of the storm brews between Tony, Junior, and Livia, three forces whose tensions shape the entire first season. Junior resents Tony's growing influence. Livia, feeling abandoned by Tony, begins hinting to Junior, in her cryptic and emotionally venomous way, that Tony might be plotting against him. And Junior listens. He listens because her words tap into every insecurity he already has. This poisonous whispering sets the stage for an escalation that becomes inevitable. Junior begins to make moves. He aligns himself with those who feel overlooked, slighted, or threatened by Tony's quiet rise. And he authorizes hits, violent, decisive attempts to eliminate enemies and assert his dominance. As tensions rise, violence ripples through Tony's world. Friends become threats, allies become liabilities. His therapy sessions deepen, exposing wounds that go back to his childhood, memories of his father's criminal life, his mother's manipulative emotional storms, and the twisted way affection and cruelty wove together in his upbringing. These sessions become the emotional backbone of Tony's transformation, even as his criminal life grows more dangerous. And all the while, Livia watches, cold, detached, calculating. The storm that has been gathering around Tony continues to tighten, and its center is a quiet, simmering betrayal forming between the people he should have been able to trust the most. Junior's resentment grows with each day Tony quietly gains influence. And Livia, whether intentionally or simply out of her own bitterness, feeds that resentment with carefully chosen remarks. She never explicitly tells Junior to act, but her tone, her sighs, her warnings about Tony's supposed disloyalty form a dangerous whisper that pushes Junior toward violence. Meanwhile, Tony's crew is dealing with internal fractures of its own. Big Pussy Bonpensiero, an old friend and trusted associate, begins to behave strangely. He claims he's suffering from back pain, avoiding meetings, disappearing unexpectedly. Tony notices. The crew notices. And in their world, when a man becomes evasive, the fear that he may be cooperating with law enforcement becomes impossible to ignore. Tony wants to give him the benefit of the doubt, but paranoia grows quickly in a life where betrayal is often punished with finality. Tony tries to maintain control, balancing loyalty and suspicion as he navigates a shifting landscape of alliances. At the same time, his therapy sessions with Dr. Melfi become more revealing. He talks about his childhood, his father's violent business dealings, and the emotional coldness that shaped him. He also opens up about the ducks in his pool, symbols of family, safety, and a life he wishes he could protect. When they fly away early in the season, Tony breaks down in front of Dr. Melfi, confessing fears about losing his own family. It is one of the rare moments where the facade of the mob boss cracks completely. But Tony's life offers no time for vulnerability. The atmosphere becomes even more charged as Junior decides to take full advantage of his new title. He begins to enforce his authority with harsh moves, taxing associates, punishing those who question him, and undermining Tony wherever he can. Tony, for his part, remains outwardly compliant, playing the role of a supportive nephew while quietly maneuvering behind the scenes to strengthen his own position. Still, pressure grows. When one of Tony's longtime earners is threatened by Junior's new taxes, Tony is forced to intervene, leading to a dangerous confrontation. The balance of power becomes fragile, and small disputes turn into larger conflicts as old loyalties are tested. In the middle of all this, life at home continues, messy, loud, and painfully human. Meadow prepares for college entrance exams, battling stress and flirting with rebellion. Tony wants to be present, but his days are dominated by chaos, and he often finds himself torn between being a father and being a boss. Carmela, meanwhile, struggles with the moral contradictions of her life, especially during conversations with Father Phil, who offers spiritual comfort that sometimes strays too close to emotional intimacy. As tensions mount, Junior makes a bold move. He authorizes a hit on one of Tony's close associates, escalating the conflict to a point where neutrality is no longer possible. Tony begins to feel the walls closing in. His panic attacks return, triggered by the growing knowledge that someone is plotting against him. Dr. Melfi notices the shift. Tony's sessions become darker, more fragmented, revealing a man who senses betrayal but cannot yet name its source. At the same time, Livia's behavior becomes increasingly erratic. She wanders between vulnerability and cold hostility, saying one thing and implying another. Tony tries to help her again, urging her to accept care and safety. But she weaponizes his concern, twisting conversations into accusations. When Tony attempts to move her into the retirement community, Green Grove, she reacts with outrage, insisting she is being abandoned. Her resentment deepens, and her murmured complaints to Junior grow sharper, more pointed. Tony's crew starts losing faith in Junior's leadership, and unrest spreads through the organization. Christopher grows more impatient and insecure, feeling that his hard work is overlooked. His frustrations manifest in bursts of aggression and questionable decisions, leaving Tony to step in and mitigate the fallout. Each of these fires demands Tony's attention, leaving him exhausted as he tries to keep both his professional and personal lives from falling apart. Through all of this, Tony's visits to Dr. Melfi become a lifeline. She encourages him to recognize patterns in his relationships, especially with his mother, and confront the emotional burdens he carries. Her steady voice provides clarity, but Tony remains conflicted. He admires her strength, resents her questions, and fears the vulnerability she exposes in him. Their sessions become an intense psychological dance between truth and avoidance, between confession. The uneasy balance that Tony has been trying to maintain finally begins to crumble when the quiet rumors about an assassination plot become impossible to ignore. The tension is no longer an abstract feeling. It's a pulse running through the streets, the businesses, and every conversation whispered behind closed doors. Tony begins to sense the truth. Someone close is moving against him. But who is bold or foolish enough to make that kind of move? And more importantly, who is whispering in their ear? He doesn't want to admit it, but one possibility weighs heavier than all the others: his mother. Livia's behavior has become increasingly unpredictable. One moment she is confused and fragile. The next, she is sharp enough to cut stone with a single remark. When she speaks about Tony to others, her tone shifts, full of grievance, disappointment, and something darker, something that makes listeners wonder if she wants Tony punished for a lifetime of perceived slights. While Tony tries to make sense of this emotional maze, Junior escalates his campaign for dominance. He misinterprets Livia's subtle manipulations as actual confirmation that Tony is planning to undermine him. Her hints, her sighs, her carefully chosen words, all of them become fuel for Junior's paranoia. And paranoia in the world of organized crime never sits quietly. It grows, expands, and demands action. Meanwhile, Tony's crew is becoming restless. They trust Tony, but the political atmosphere has changed. Junior's new authority brings stricter rules, unfair taxes, and unnecessary violence. Associates begin to grumble. Earnings drop. Fear spreads. Tony tries to calm the seas, but his influence is under attack from all sides. Emotionally at home, politically in the family, psychologically in therapy. His sessions with Dr. Melfi shift again, now filled with suspicion, dread, and reflections on betrayal. She tries to guide him toward understanding the deeper wounds caused by his mother's coldness and unpredictability. Tony tries to brush it off, insisting he's simply stressed. But Dr. Melfi sees through him. She sees a man who has lived his entire life, anticipating emotional ambushes, always bracing for impact, never able to trust fully, not even with those who share his blood. Tony begins to realize that his panic attacks might be more than a response to violence or stress. They might be the result of decades spent navigating emotional landmines set by his own family. This realization terrifies him more than any rival or hitman ever could. While Tony is confronting emotional truths, chaos erupts on the streets. A key member of the organization, someone Tony relies on, is targeted in a violent ambush orchestrated under Junior's orders. The attack sends shockwaves through the crew, confirming what Tony has been fearing. Junior isn't just posturing. He is making active moves to eliminate anyone loyal to Tony. Tony reacts quickly and decisively, rallying his closest men to protect themselves and their interests. He doesn't strike back immediately. Instead, he gathers information, observes patterns, and looks for the hidden hands behind the attack. But the more he looks, the more the pieces point towards something unthinkable: his mother's involvement. The realization dawns slowly, painfully, like a wound reopening. Tony pieces together the conversations, the timing, the strange coincidences, and Livia's increasingly hostile remarks. Her influence on Junior becomes undeniable. But even with all the evidence in front of him, Tony struggles to accept it. The idea that his own mother would align herself with someone trying to kill him feels unreal, monstrous. Still, the truth weighs on him. Livia didn't hold the gun, but she lit the fuse. As if the emotional storm weren't enough, Tony's personal life is also strained. Meadow's life becomes increasingly complicated as she deals with the pressures of school, friendships, and the growing realization that her family is far from normal. AJ drifts through adolescence with confusion, sensing something is wrong, but unable to articulate it. Carmela tries to hold the household together, but her frustrations with Tony's absences and his dangerous lifestyle boil to the surface more frequently. Tony feels like he is losing control of everything at once. His family is pulling away, his crew is under attack, and his mother is tangled in the plots against him. The pressure builds until it becomes almost unbearable, and his panic attacks return with greater force, threatening to expose him at the worst possible moments. In the midst of this crisis, Tony's enemies grow bolder. Junior finalizes plans for a hit that will strike directly at Tony himself. The men chosen for the job are confident, armed, and motivated. They believe that killing Tony will secure Junior's reign and stabilize the family under his command. But Tony's instincts, honed by years of navigating danger, kick in. He senses the threat before it reaches him fully. A combination of intuition, luck, and the loyalty of a few close allies helps him avoid the assassination attempt, barely. The attack leaves him shaken but alive. Survival changes everything. It confirms the betrayal. It confirms the danger. And it confirms, with devastating clarity, that he can no longer allow Junior, or Livia, to control the narrative. Tony prepares for the inevitable showdown. The failed hit on Tony becomes the turning point, the moment when hesitation turns into purpose and fear hardens into resolve. Surviving an assassination attempt forces him to acknowledge what he had been trying to avoid. Junior isn't simply posturing as boss, and Livia isn't merely complaining from the sidelines. Together, knowingly or not, they have pushed events toward a direct and deadly confrontation. Tony tries to think clearly, but he is torn between fury and heartbreak. Junior's betrayal is expected. Politics in their world often turn bloody. But the idea that his own mother might have encouraged Junior to do something about Tony gnaws at him like a poison. Dr. Melfi's earlier observations about Livia's manipulative tendencies suddenly take on a frightening clarity. Tony begins to connect emotional patterns he had ignored all his life. The way she weaponizes helplessness, the way she turns people against each other, the way she nurtures grudges until they bloom into something toxic. But even with this new understanding, the emotional reality still feels surreal. He wants to believe she couldn't have meant for him to be hurt. Yet every clue points back to her. Her bitterness, her whispered complaints, her angry insistence that Tony had betrayed her, not the other way around. Meanwhile, Tony's crew rallies behind him with renewed loyalty. The attempt on his life transforms the dynamic. What had once been quiet doubts about Junior's leadership now become open condemnation. Men who had been cautious about choosing sides begin to shift decisively toward Tony, recognizing him as the true source of strength and stability. Even those who feared Junior's vindictive streak now understand that aligning with Tony is both safer and smarter. Tony's response to the attack is methodical. He wasn't strike impulsively. He planned strategically, analyzing Junior's support network, identifying vulnerabilities, and preparing his crew for a swift and decisive retaliation. The aim isn't chaos, it's control. Tony wants to end the threat without igniting a full-scale internal war that could weaken the entire organization. Christopher, fueled by loyalty and adrenaline, becomes one of Tony's most eager allies. His impulsive nature, once a liability, now becomes a fierce asset in the confrontation ahead. Silvio and Paulie, always steady, move with calculated precision. Together, they form the backbone of Tony's counteroffensive, ready to neutralize Junior's influence before it can grow again. But as Tony prepares for war in the streets, he faces another crisis at home. Livia suffers what appears to be a medical emergency and is rushed to the hospital. Carmela insists that Tony visit, despite the swirling suspicions and emotional scars. When Tony arrives, he finds Livia in a state that hovers between confusion and cunning. Her reactions feel carefully measured, moments of memory lapse mixed with flashes of sharp, knowing glances. Tony confronts her, letting the pain slip through in his voice. "You know what you did," he tells her, not shouting, but with a steady intensity that cuts through the room. But Livia denies everything, slipping into her familiar pattern of deflection and emotional manipulation. Whether she is genuinely confused or expertly pretending is impossible to determine. Tony's anger burns, but there is no satisfaction in the confrontation, only emptiness. In contrast to the emotional chaos surrounding Livia, Tony's therapy with Dr. Melfi becomes strangely grounding. When Tony admits that someone close has tried to harm him, Dr. Melfi reacts with genuine fear, not just for Tony's safety, but for her own. Tony's world is bleeding into hers in ways that could put both of them at risk. When she realizes that she may now be a target simply by association, she makes the difficult decision to leave town temporarily, forcing Tony to confront the danger his life brings to everyone around him. With emotional ties strained, Tony returns his focus to the crisis at hand. The retaliation against Junior's crew unfolds swiftly. Tony's men target Junior's closest associates, disrupting operations, asserting control, and eliminating immediate threats. These actions effectively cripple Junior's backing, leaving him isolated and vulnerable. But Tony stops short of ordering Junior's execution. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, the violence, the attempted murder, Junior is still family. And in their world, family remains a powerful force, even when it has been twisted by politics and resentment. Instead, Junior is arrested by federal agents during this chaotic period, effectively neutralizing him without Tony having to pull the final trigger. The fallout from the conflict reshapes the entire organization. With Junior under indictment, Tony emerges as the undisputed power in the family, the man everyone now looks to for leadership. The quiet, behind-the-scenes influence he once wielded becomes open authority. But victory comes at a price. The emotional wounds inflicted by Livia's involvement remain raw. Tony struggles with the knowledge that the person who was supposed to protect him as a child has become a source of danger in his adult life. And despite her hospitalization, her presence looms over him like a shadow he cannot escape. As the season draws to a close, Tony gathers his family and closest friends for a rare moment of togetherness. They sit in a restaurant during a storm, sharing food, stories, and warmth, while thunder rumbles outside. The scene, quiet and intimate, contrasts with the violence and turmoil they have just survived. It symbolizes something deeper, the fragile but enduring connections that give Tony's life meaning, even in the face of betrayal and chaos. He raises a toast, acknowledging the storms they face, both literal and metaphorical, and the need to stand together. The storm outside the restaurant continues to flash against the windows, but inside, Tony allows himself a rare breath of calm. His crew, his family, the people who have stood by him through chaos, everyone is gathered around the table. Thunder rolls, yet the room feels safe, almost peaceful. For the first time in a long time, Tony feels a sense of unity, but that peace sits on top of a fragile foundation. Even as Tony enjoys the moment, he can't ignore the recent wounds. Junior is behind bars now, facing federal charges. But Tony knows that jail doesn't erase family ties or grudges. Junior will remain a presence in the shadows of Tony's life, a reminder that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. And then there is Livia. Tony's anger toward her simmers like a pot left on low heat. Her emotional manipulation, her bitter whispers, her involvement, intentional or not, in the plot against him still sting deeply. He tries to explain this pain to Carmela, but his words come out heavy, tangled in frustration. Carmela listens, torn between sympathy and discomfort. She's always known Livia was difficult, but learning of her deeper involvement shakes her. Tony's children sense the tension as well, even though they're shielded from the full truth. Meadow, perceptive and growing more mature, watches her father carefully. AJ, still young and confused, simply asks why everyone seems so stressed. Tony answers with half-truths, protecting them the only way he knows how. Meanwhile, Dr. Melfi's absence hangs over Tony's mind. Her abrupt departure for safety leaves him without the emotional anchor he's grown used to. Their sessions were never easy, but they provided a clarity he now feels slipping away. Without her guidance, Tony wrestles alone with the emotional scars reopened by Livia's betrayal. As the rain pounds harder outside the restaurant, Tony reflects on everything that has happened. The near-death experience, the treachery, the unraveling of trust. And he realizes something important. Despite all the violence and deception in his world, the people sitting with him now are the ones he must protect above all else. Family, both blood and chosen, remains at the center of everything he does. He lifts his glass and offers a toast. His voice is steady, carrying both exhaustion and resolve. He speaks about weathering storms, how they come without warning, how they break structures not built on strong foundations, and how surviving them together is what truly matters. His crew listens with a newfound understanding of the weight on Tony's shoulders. For a moment, the thunder quiets. Laughter returns to the table. Plates are passed, wine is shared, and the warmth of community fills the space. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, moments of connection still shine through. In the days following the storm, Tony moves carefully through the shifting terrain of his life. Junior's arrest has created a power vacuum, one that Tony must fill with precision rather than force. The other captains, now fully aware of his survival and his strategic mind, come to him with respect, even caution. Tony steps into leadership not with celebration, but with the gravity of someone who knows that every new responsibility brings new threats. But while Tony's power grows outwardly, his inner world remains at war. Livia's hospitalization forces him to confront emotions too complicated to simply name as anger or betrayal. He visits her, standing at her bedside, watching her drift between confusion and sharp awareness. Her eyes flicker with something unreadable, fear, resentment, or calculation, Tony cannot tell. And that uncertainty hurts almost as much as the knowledge of her involvement in the plot against him. He confides in Carmela about the impossible weight of these emotions. Carmela listens with the weary compassion of someone who has lived beside Tony's storms for years. She urges him to find forgiveness, not because Livia deserves it, but because Tony needs the peace it could bring. But Tony is not built for forgiveness. He is built for survival. And forgiveness, in his world, often feels like a weakness. Meadow, preparing for college and growing more independent, begins to see her father as more than a distant, unpredictable figure. She watches him closely, picking up on the tension he tries to mask. AJ remains oblivious, insulated by youth and innocence, though he cannot escape the feeling that something in the house is fundamentally unsettled. Tony considers returning to therapy, craving the clarity and grounding that Dr. Melfi once offered. But she is still in hiding, protecting herself from any unintended fallout from Tony's life. Her absence leaves Tony feeling exposed, like a man without armor. The emotional burden builds, but he swallows it, pushing forward with the practiced resilience of someone who has survived on instinct since childhood. In the criminal world, Tony stabilizes the family with swift, decisive moves. He consolidates earnings, mediates disputes, and quietly rebuilds trust where Junior's leadership had caused fractures. Associates who once wavered see that Tony's survival was not luck, it was inevitability. They align themselves with him, strengthening his position even further. Yet even as control returns, a lingering sadness shadows Tony's victories. The betrayal from within his own bloodline, Livia's cold whisper that set everything in motion, leaves a wound that leadership and money cannot heal. Family has always been the core of Tony's identity, but now he must face the truth that not all family offers safety. Some offer danger, wrapped in a mother's voice. Still, Tony presses forward, because in his world stopping is never an option. Reflection is a luxury, and regret is a liability. He carries the lessons of the past months with him like armor. Trust must be earned, loyalty must be watched, and even the smallest whisper can trigger a war. Season 1 closes with Tony stepping into a new chapter, stronger, more aware, and more isolated than ever. The world around him is shifted, and so is he. Whatever comes next, he faces it not as a man running from panic, but as a leader who has survived betrayal from both criminals and kin. In the quiet after the storm, Tony begins to move through life with a tempered vigilance. The world hasn't become safer. He has simply learned to read its shadows more clearly. Each morning begins with the same routine: coffee, a quiet moment in the kitchen, and a brief attempt at normalcy before the demands of leadership pull him back into motion. But nothing feels exactly the same. The events of the season have carved new lines in his mind, new habits of caution. Junior remains in custody, wrapped in legal battles and unable to influence the streets directly. Still, Tony knows better than to consider him harmless. Prison can harden resentment. It can clarify grudges. And it can give a man too much time to think about who he blames for his downfall. Tony keeps a careful eye on Junior's remaining supporters, gently pressuring some, removing others from positions where they might cause problems. But not all threats come with guns or badges. Some come with memories. Livia remains a heavy presence, even from her hospital bed. Her condition fluctuates. The doctors call it aging, emotional trauma, cognitive decline. But Tony can't shake the feeling that part of her confusion is intentional. He visits her less frequently, torn between obligation and self-preservation. Every time he stands at her bedside, the same question rises in him like a quiet echo. How could she? The emotional wound she left refuses to close. Carmela senses the depth of this pain. She tries to bridge the distance between Tony and his mother, but even she cannot deny the damage Livia has caused. Her advice shifts from reconciliation to emotional boundaries. Carmela begins encouraging Tony to accept that some relationships, even family, are dangerous to the soul. The kids sense the shift as well. Meadow becomes more aware of the emotional complexity in the household. She studies her father with thoughtful eyes, seeing beyond the bluster into the conflicted man beneath. AJ, still caught in the world of adolescence, remains focused on school, friends, and the simple rhythms of being young, but even he notices the heaviness that lingers in the house. Tony's search for stability eventually leads him back to thoughts of Dr. Melfi. Her absence has proven how essential those sessions were, how much clarity they offered, how much ground they provided beneath his feet. Without her voice guiding him through the maze of his emotions, Tony finds himself slipping into old patterns, suppressing, reacting, exploding, retreating. He debates seeking out another therapist, but loyalty and trust mean more to Tony than any clinical expertise. He waits, hoping she will return. Meanwhile, his crew continues to strengthen under his leadership. Silvio, Paulie, and Christopher each step into their roles with renewed purpose. Christopher, while still impulsive and hungry for recognition, begins to understand the weight of responsibility. Paulie remains reliable and stern, a soldier through and through. Silvio acts as Tony's quiet strategist, providing steady counsel through each political ripple. Together, they turn the once shaken organization into a well-balanced machine again. The businesses flourish, the tensions ease, and the fear that once dominated the crew gives way to cautious optimism. But Tony is no longer naive. He knows peace in his world is temporary, a breath between storms rather than a final calm. He stands once more at the edge of the family's world, between loyalty and danger, between affection and betrayal, between the man he wants to be and the man he must be. And though the season's battles have ended, Tony knows he has only crossed the first threshold of a long journey filled with new threats, new tests of loyalty, and new reckonings with his own past. As the days progress, Tony tries to rebuild routines, those small anchors that make life feel predictable, even when it never truly is. Breakfast with the kids, quick conversations with Carmela, a brief drive past familiar neighborhoods. Each moment acts like a thread stitching normalcy back into a life torn open by betrayal. But beneath the surface, Tony feels something new. A cautious introspection, a quiet awareness that the emotional armor he's worn for years has begun to crack. The lessons of the past months linger like echoes. Junior's betrayal still pulses through Tony's mind, not because of the physical danger, but because it came from someone who was supposed to be family. And the deeper, more painful betrayal, Livia's involvement, continues to shape how Tony navigates every interaction. It becomes a framework through which he reassesses trust, affection, and loyalty. Tony finds himself replaying old memories. Livia's sharp criticisms, her cold dismissals, her subtle guilt trips. What once felt like just the way she was, now reveals itself as a long-standing pattern of manipulation. Understanding this doesn't erase the pain, but it gives Tony a new kind of power. The ability to step back emotionally, to stop chasing approval from someone who never intended to give it. Carmela watches Tony closely. She sees the fatigue behind his eyes, the weight he carries but can't verbalize. She encourages him to talk, to open up. But Tony retreats into silence more often than not. Instead of speaking, he distracts himself with work, settling disputes among the crew, ensuring business runs smoothly. making sure everyone knows the new order is stable and strong. Christopher becomes a more central figure in Tony's orbit. His ambition is still fiery, still wild at the edges. But Tony senses potential in him, a raw energy that could be shaped into real leadership if guided properly. Tony tries, in his imperfect way, to mentor him. He teaches Christopher about patience, about subtlety, about understanding the difference between fear and respect. Sometimes Christopher listens, sometimes he doesn't. But the connection between them deepens. Silvio, ever reliable, becomes Tony's voice of calm logic. Paulie remains the unwavering soldier, loyal to a fault. These relationships form a protective circle around Tony, both personally and professionally. They remind him that while some family members can wound him deeply, there are others, chosen family, who stand ready to defend him without hesitation. Still, the emotional void left by Dr. Melfi's absence becomes more apparent as time passes. Tony tries to process the trauma on his own, but the unresolved anger, fear, and sadness continue to churn beneath the surface. Without a space to vent or reflect, his inner world feels like a pressure cooker. He buries himself in the day-to-day tasks of leadership, hoping the distraction will keep him steady. But leadership brings its own challenges. He must navigate shifting alliances, manage egos, and monitor old grudges that could spark at any moment. The threat landscape hasn't disappeared, it has merely changed shape. Tony understands now, more than ever, that each victory makes him a target, each show of strength inspires envy, and each moment of vulnerability invites danger. Yet despite all of this, Tony begins to reclaim something he had lost early in the season, a sense of direction. He knows who he is, what he must protect, and where the true risks lie. The storm may have passed, but it has left behind clarity. Tony moves through his world with renewed awareness, sharper instincts, and a deeper understanding of the emotional forces that shape him. And so, as he stands on the threshold of the next chapter, Tony carries forward the lessons of betrayal, the strength of survival, and the unwavering loyalty of those who remain by his side. The season's chaos has forged him into a more deliberate, more dangerous, and more grounded leader. In the weeks that follow, Tony's life settles into a tense rhythm. Outwardly, things appear under control. The businesses run smoothly. Disputes are handled quickly. And the organization operates with renewed discipline. But, inwardly, Tony carries a heaviness that never fully lifts. The pressures of leadership, the betrayal from within his own family, and the absence of emotional support leave him moving through each day with a quiet, persistent tension beneath the surface. Tony begins paying closer attention to the people around him. Not out of paranoia, but out of necessity. He studies expressions, pauses in conversations, shifts in loyalty. Everything feels sharper now, clearer, as though surviving the assassination attempt has heightened all his senses. He understands that threats rarely announce themselves loudly. Most creep in through familiar faces, quiet remarks, or unguarded moments. Carmela notices Tony's increased watchfulness. At first, she thinks it is merely the lingering impact of recent events. But as the days pass, she sees that Tony has become more selective about who he lets near him emotionally. The realization worries her. She knows Tony needs connection, real grounded connection, or he will retreat into darker corners of himself. She encourages him to open up, to process what he has endured. But Tony brushes off the attempts, insisting he is fine. Meadow continues to grow more aware of the complexities in her family. She begins asking subtle questions about Tony's past, about the tension with Livia, about why certain relatives are suddenly away. Tony dances around these inquiries with half-truths and vague reassurances. He wants Meadow to see him as a father, not as a man shaped by violence and trauma. AJ, meanwhile, remains comfortably shielded, oblivious to the deeper conflicts that swirl beneath the household's surface. Among the crew, Tony asserts his authority with a mix of quiet guidance and firm decisions. Christopher, eager to prove himself, throws his energy into new ventures. His ambition remains volatile, but Tony continues to offer direction, shaping him slowly into a more responsible earner. Silvio monitors operations with his usual calm, while Paulie keeps the rank and file in line with unwavering loyalty. Together, they form a stable inner circle that reinforces Tony's position. But even with this stability, Tony feels the absence of Dr. Melfi more acutely with each passing week. Without her grounding influence, his emotions settle unevenly, like sediment in murky water. He tries to manage the internal storm on his own, convincing himself that therapy made him vulnerable, and that vulnerability almost got him killed. Still, in quiet moments he admits, if only to himself, that he misses her voice guiding him through the tangled knots inside his mind. Tony adapts. He always does. But something fundamental has changed. The season's events have taught him that threats can grow from places he once considered safe, and that trust must now be earned with greater scrutiny. He carries this new understanding with a mixture of strength and sorrow. As Tony drives through New Jersey late one evening, streetlights flashing across the windshield, he reflects on everything the season has taken from him, and everything it has forced him to become. Leadership has a cost. Survival has a cost. And family, for all its closeness and comfort, carries the sharpest edges of all.